Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and others did seemingly violate at least one federal campaign finance law, possibly multiple campaign finance laws. So which law was violated? The law that prohibits soliciting a contribution from a foreign national.
Or a thing of value. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the allegation that Common Cause made in a complaint that we've sent to the Department of Justice on July 10th, 2017, so over a year ago. And I think you were just about to get into this. The term contribution in the law is defined to mean anything of value given for the purpose of influencing an election. Here we know that going into that meeting, Donald Trump Jr. was told that he was going to be given information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton, opposition research information. And this type of information, oppo research, is regularly bought and sold by political players at every level of politics. It is definitely something of value, and Donald Trump Jr. and the campaign asked for that free oppo research on Clinton in this Trump Tower meeting.
There are reports that it was actually in the public domain. It was on Twitter, and there were some news stories in relatively obscure publications, but this was, before any of this stuff came out, that the Russians had Hillary's emails, that they were going to leak this stuff, that, get ready, et cetera. What's the timeline here? What does this say about, conspiracy to defraud the United States? Conspiracy to commit the crime of violating the campaign laws by taking a thing of value from a foreign actor, that sort of thing. What do we know about what has happened?
Well, we don't know whether or not Team Trump did in fact receive something of value from the Russians during that Trump Tower meeting or as a result of that meeting. If Team Trump did, and there's pretty good reason to at least believe they may have and to conduct a thorough investigation, then that opens the door to several other violations of federal law, including other provisions of the Federal Election Campaign Act, as well as provisions of the criminal code. So what are those additional violations? I already mentioned violation number one that looks like it occurred regardless of whether they got anything of value. That's the ban on soliciting a contribution from a foreign national. If they in fact received something of value, hacked emails that were stolen from the Clinton campaign or the DNC, or any other valuable campaign material, we're looking at additional violations of receiving an illegal foreign national contribution. That's a violation of the campaign finance laws, and failing to report a receipt of an in-kind contribution, another violation of the Federal Election Campaign Act. And it's that failure to report that opens the door to other prosecution for other crimes, including, for example, the one you just mentioned, conspiracy to defraud. Now, the Department of Justice has historically relied on that crime, conspiracy to defraud, to include instances in which a candidate or other political player has tried to mislead the Federal Election Commission or obstruct the FEC's enforcement of laws like the ban on foreign national contributions. So filing an incomplete disclosure report with the FEC, that is subject to a charge of conspiracy to defraud. There are a couple other criminal statutes that prohibit lying to the federal government. And we also have attempted conspiracy counts that could be thrown on top of all of these. So, by my math, that gets us to, if they in fact received something of value from the Russians to influence the campaign, at least 6 different counts of federal law violations. Wow.
And so, correct me if I'm on my timeline here, if I'm wrong on this, but my recollection is, well, actually, it was either, there was a meeting, there was an event on July 7 and an event on July 9, and I don't remember which one was the meeting in Trump Tower and which was Trump telling an audience that any day now he was going to be releasing, that in a week or two he was going to hold a press conference and release dirt on Hillary. But he never held that press conference. He never did that. But the stuff came out from Guccifer and, via WikiLeaks and all that. So what if they had this meeting and said, the Russians said, okay, we've got this information for you, and say somebody who actually had some understanding of the election laws, I don't know if Paul Manafort qualifies as that, I doubt Jared Kushner or Don Jr., but maybe, said, well, that's cool, but don't give that information to us because that's a clear violation of federal law. Instead, just release it, via WikiLeaks or out to the press, because that's what happened. Would that minimize their liability?
I don't think so. It makes the case a little bit more complicated, but the scenario you're setting up would be the Trump campaign suggesting to the Russians that they disseminate this information independently,
or vice versa. I mean, it's possible that the Russians said to the Trump campaign, you know, we know campaign finance law, and you don't want to get yourself in trouble here. Let us do this.
So the important point here legally is that if there's actual coordination, if there's conversations between a candidate and an outside group, Russians or an outside political spender, about how the outsider will release info or do something helpful to the candidate, that means that's no longer independent. That is treated under the law as if they'd given the anything of value, the something of value, directly to the campaign. This coordination turns independent political activity into an in-kind contribution to the campaign, subject to the same restrictions as if the info, the Oppo research had been given directly to the Trump campaign. And
right.
I want to mention one other thing, because you're mentioning who might have, whether or not these folks in the room had knowledge of these federal campaign finance laws. I'll tell you who was involved with the campaign, who knew all about the campaign finance laws. The campaign's general counsel, Don McGahn. He was the former chairman of the Federal Election Commission, and today he is White House counsel. I cannot imagine that he would not be involved in these high-level decisions around campaign activity, nor can I imagine that he did not brief the high-level campaign staff at the very least about the rough requirements of federal campaign finance law. And not taking contributions from foreign nationals, that's campaign finance law 101.
So this might have been Don McGahn's bright idea to pass along, which raises another, feel free to react to that, but it also raises another interesting question, which is, if Donald Trump's tweet is correct, and that tweet just blew my mind, because I remember when Michael Flynn, when they were closing it, Michael Flynn had hired his son, or his son was involved in his consulting company, and his consulting company was all tied up in this whole Russia-Trump thing. And when Mueller started going after Flynn's son, Mike Jr., Michael Flynn said, hey, don't take out my son. If you stop trying to prosecute my son, I will turn state's evidence. I'll give myself over to you. You send me to jail instead of my kid. Donald Trump, on the other hand, says, yeah, Don Jr. was there. The meeting was about getting this information. And by the way, I knew nothing about it, which says something, I think, about his personality and his ethics and how much he loves his kids. But beyond that, if we were to assume for a moment that Donald Trump actually told the truth in that tweet, that he actually did know nothing about it, what does this mean for Don Jr. and what does this mean for Don Sr.?
Well, it means that if Don Sr. knew nothing about this, then he would not be personally liable for the types of crimes that I've been discussing earlier in our conversation. But the campaign committee is a legal entity. It was represented at this meeting by Don Jr., Kushner, Manafort. They were campaign officials. So the campaign committee itself could quite possibly be found to have violated federal law, and the individuals themselves, as agents of the campaign committee, likewise could be found to violate these federal laws. I want to circle back 1 minute to Don McGahn, because
Sure.
you mentioned maybe this was his idea. Don McGahn knows federal campaign finance law inside and out. I don't want to imply that I believe that any of this was his idea. I think that he would probably have given the correct legal advice to his clients, which is don't do any of this. Now,
right.
I think it's very possible that Team Trump ignored that advice, but Don McGahn and I have agreed on almost nothing throughout our careers on campaign finance law and issues, but he knows the law, and I think he would have counseled his clients correctly.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Paul Ryan, the good Paul Ryan, the Vice President of Policy and Litigation at Common Cause, commoncause.org. You can tweet him at the Paul S. Ryan. Paul, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Great talking with you. Fascinating conversation. A lot of stuff to chew on there, a lot to think about. We'll be back with more of the news of the day, and boy, is there a lot of the news of the day, and your calls after this. It's coming up on 16 minutes past the...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'm Thom Hartmann. We'll be back with your calls. And welcome back. Let's see, Darlene in Grand Prairie, Texas, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Darlene, what's on your mind today?
Well, a lot of things are on my mind. But today, you have the question, do you regret voting for Trump? The real topic should be, do you regret not voting?
Yeah, because that's true. That's true of a much larger cohort.
Exactly, because I don't think Trump voter is going to ever regret it until it really hits them in the face.
Yeah.
But the real problem are the non-voters.
Yeah, like this. The Trump voters are, to your point, like the guy who just had his wife, the Trump voter, the Trump enthusiast, the former military, the veteran who just had his wife deported, and he's shocked. Oh my God, I didn't realize that Trump was going to do that.
Yeah, well, they don't listen to him anyway.
Apparently.
But I'm still wrestling with why did these people not vote?
Well, there was a large and active campaign to encourage Democrats not to vote. To say that, oh, Hillary Clinton is just a shill, or she's just this or just that, and it's they're equally corrupt, and Tweedledum, Tweedledee, et cetera, et cetera. And we were hearing this from the left. I was not saying this, but you were hearing this from some people on the left, and apparently we were hearing this from the Russian Internet Research Bureau posts on Facebook and Twitter all over the place. So I think some people just internalized that, and a lot of people voted Green. I mean, the Green Party. I don't know that it beat the margin of victory in any of those states, but it certainly didn't help. And this is why I loved it when David Cobb ran for president on the Green Party ticket. I think it was in 2004, and he said, if you live in a swing state, vote for the Democrat. If you live in a solidly red or solidly blue state where your vote is not going to have that much impact, feel free to vote for me. And, that made sense to me. I thought David ran an ethical campaign, but Jill Stein did not do that. Ralph Nader did not do that. And ultimately, Ralph Nader not doing that hurt us in Florida and gave George Bush the presidency. Some would say, Ralph would say, no, it wasn't that. It was voter suppression, and which I agree with.
I don't even think it was Florida's fault for getting Bush elected. If
the Supreme
Gore
Court
had won his home state, he would have won, and he didn't even need Florida.
Yeah.
But he lost Tennessee, so I blame Tennessee.
Well, I think you could blame Al Gore, actually. If Al Gore had not picked Joe Lieberman as his vice president, who, was just an open neoconservative Republican light, and if he had not refused to take any help from Bill Clinton at that point had an over 60% popularity rating, but Al Gore was offended by the fact that he'd had sex with an intern in the White House. Al's sentiments and Tipper's sentiments apparently were very, very offended by that, which is, pretty unfortunate, I would say. Had that not happened, then I think that you would have different circumstances. So anyway, we'll see. Darlene, thanks for the call. Al Gore did not run a brilliant campaign, unfortunately. He was a decent candidate and a decent man. I've met Al Gore, talked with him at some length, and he kind of redeemed himself with his climate work. But whoever was advising him on that campaign, particularly whoever advised him to put Joe Lieberman on the ticket with him, turned off a lot of potential voters. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We were talking about we will get to that. The neoliberal assault on Canadian Medicare. I wanted to get into this for a minute, and then I'll pick up your phone calls after the break at the bottom of the hour. Lambert Strether is writing over at nakedcapitalism.com, which sounds a little risque, but it's not. It's actually a really great progressive website for economists, for progressive economists and progressive economics. And there is a playbook that neoliberals use, and both in the Republican and Democratic Party, and particularly neoliberals in the media, there is an actual playbook that they use to take us from publicly funded programs to privatized programs. Whether it's the electric grid, you saw this played out with Enron in California, whether it is the water system, whether it's the septic systems, whether it's public schools, whether it's public health care, whether it's the Veterans Administration, whether it's the Social Security Administration, whether it's the post office. You see all these things that we all collectively pay for, that we all collectively want to be produced for the benefit of all Americans at the lowest possible cost. And without the profit motive, because these are things that affect all of our lives. These are things that directly have to do with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as opposed to just getting stuff. You know, I've said a million times on this program, well, probably a couple 100,000 times on this program, I don't want the government making my jeans. I don't want them making my shoes. I don't want them making my car. You know, I lived in Germany. I remember the Ladas made in Russia and the Trebbies made in East Germany. They were terrible cars. Right, these little 3-cylinder cars in East Germany, going down the street, just, you know, blowing smoke out the back because they were 2-cycle engines. I don't want the government doing any of that stuff. There is an entirely and large and appropriate place for private industry in the United States. But I don't want the profit motive sitting between me and the water coming out of my tap, sitting between me and the electricity coming into my house, sitting between me and the septic system that goes out of my house, sitting between me and my health care, sitting between me and my internet connection, sitting between me and my schools, and sitting between me and my post office. Those are all things that we have, for a long time in America, had a broad consensus should be part of the commons. The stuff that we all own and we all use. The stuff that is essential for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the neoliberalism playbook is very, very specific. Number one, here's how, in the classic example that we're seeing, that we're watching right now, of a neoliberal train wreck happening right now as I speak, is with Social Security and Medicare. And it happened last year when the Republicans passed this tax bill and this piece of a budget bill that cut funding for the Social Security Administration and Medicare. Not for your benefits. They didn't cut your benefits yet, but they cut the staff of Social Security and Medicare. And the reason they did that was so that the service that you get when you call Social Security and Medicare sucks. Right? So step one in the neoliberal playbook is defund the program, reduce the funding for the program, break the program, wreck the program, demoralize the people who are administering the program, cut resources to the people who are administering the program, force them into a frenzy, just, oh my God, I've got so much work to do. I can't even take your phone call right now. I'm sorry. That kind of thing, right? Number one, defund or sabotage the program. We saw this with the post office. In 2005, the Congress passed the Postal Reform Act, and literally the night before this was passed, in the night, a Republican slipped into that bill, and we still don't know who it was, slipped into that bill this provision that said that the post office had to start setting aside $5 billion a year, starting in 2005, set aside $5 billion a year for 10 years to pay for the health insurance costs of postal workers who retire 75 years after 2005. In other words, in 2080. There's no reason for this. It's never been done before with any government agency. It's never been done in private industry. There's absolutely no reason for it. The post office is now sitting on $50 billion in a savings account that they can't spend until 2080. Now, why did they do this? To dramatically damage the service of the post office. The post office in 2005, when they passed this law, was on the verge of electrifying their entire fleet. But they had to break it. They had to break the post office first. And then they could call for step two. They could say, there's a crisis. Oh my God, there's a crisis. Social Security's in a crisis. Look at the long wait times and they're doing this, by the way, with the Canadian healthcare system right this minute. Oh my God, look at these long wait times in Canada. Well, actually, they're not. But, this is, so declare the crisis. Number three, call for privatization. Oh, we've got to have privatization. This is what they did with the Veterans Administration. They said, veterans, the VA is not taking care of our veterans in a timely fashion. This is after years of cutting funding for the Veterans Administration. The VA is not keeping up with the demands of the Veterans Administration as a result of the two wars that George Bush lied us into, Bush and Cheney. They said, oh my God, there's a crisis. The Veterans Administration, we're not going to give them enough money to serve people. Then they said, oh my God, there's a crisis. People aren't being served. Then they said, let's privatize part of the functions. And President Obama actually went along with this. Right? I mean, we gave people these vouchers so that they could go to private practitioners. And then number 4, profit, ka-ching, we're making money off what should be a public function. Whether it's public universities, public schools, the post office, the TSA, in Britain, the National Health Service, this exact same playbook is being played out, and big time in Canada. In fact, I got to share with you a really funny thread right after the break, and then we'll pick up your phone calls. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and the neoliberals would rather you didn't know. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother. Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets, king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions. Whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine. And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the 3 divine persons, 2, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the divine Father and Mother. Quote, "From thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the 2 immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name." The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, male and female, some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer, since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal Father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the Father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, "May she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge." End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence, as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows. Quote, "From the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things." Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'll get to these tweets on Medicare, on Canadian Medicare, in just a moment, because we've got a couple of Republicans who called in to talk about voting for Trump. Dennis in Safety Harbor, Florida, listening on Sirius XM. I promise to be decent to you, Dennis. What's up?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for taking my call. I am a Republican. Have been pretty much ever since my grandmother sat me down and said, "You're a Republican."
Uh-huh.
But so many times I try to get a liberal point of view, and so many of the media outlets, friends, family, whatnot, they just all seem to fall short. And I wanted to compliment you and say that you're the first person that I've heard, and this is the first time I've heard your program, but you come across as educated, well-informed, and truly just trying to present facts as you see them.
Well, thank you.
And so I want to thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So tell us about voting for Trump and your thoughts on it.
Well, I did vote for Trump, and I do stand behind that. And part of the reason is, with my comment about trying to get a liberal point of view on things, so much of what we hear in the media just comes across as irrelevant to us. And I'm speaking for myself, but I know that I represent many people in this thought, because we hear that Trump is a racist and that he's immoral and things of that nature. And it comes across as irrelevant to us because we can look at times in the past where, okay, so he's immoral, this whole thing with Stormy Daniels and whatnot, but why is it important now but not when Clinton was in office? Or he's a racist, and but then there's Hillary's long-term mentor, and so a lot of this stuff just comes across as irrelevant.
Hang on just a second. Who's Hillary's long-term mentor? Who's a racist?
I don't remember his name, and forgive me because I'm terrible with names, but
Sure.
from what I understand, he was a member of the KKK. There was a interview that I had seen of him where he was talking along those lines. And
Yeah.
God, I wish I could remember his name,
no
and I
idea.
apologize.
Yeah, that's okay, Dennis. I have no idea who you're talking about, but I'm guessing that that's a story that was kind of confined to the Fox newsosphere. It wouldn't have been Robert Byrd. He died quite a while ago, and he repented, basically. But anyhow, back to you, Dennis.
Well, thank you. My point, though, is so we see these things, and it comes across as irrelevant, but then we also see things like Maxine Waters, basically saying to harass people. There was an interview of a lady on TV yesterday saying, they say that we're socialists, let's give them socialism. And, and we hear, open the borders. And so much.
Well, hang on just a second, Dennis. Can you name one Democratic politician in the last 30 years who has called for open borders? There's not. Here's a clue. There's not one. There are a number of Republicans who have taken that position because it is the official libertarian position. There should be no borders. There should be open access of both money and people, both business and persons, to all countries. That's the libertarian position, and there's a large libertarian cohort in the Republican Party, including Rand Paul. But you will not find a Democrat who's ever said that. But I digress. And I get what you're saying here is that it sounds like a lot of the debate has been turned into basically a cartoon debate, and I mourn that too. It also sounds to me like what you're saying, Dennis, and I'm not trying to suggest that you're being explicitly racist about this, but that the racism of Donald Trump, and I'm not talking about his past, I'm talking about his current actions and behaviors, is not a great concern to you because you're a white guy.
Absolutely not. It is. I'm saying that this is the way it comes across in the media. And when you couple that with the last few points that I made, it comes across as just scary.
Yeah.
And I would very much like your position on these things because, like I said, you are very much coming across as educated and truly trying to inform. And I'll be honest with you, I look forward to listening to your program again.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Having conservatives on my program is one of my favorite things to do, actually, and Republicans. With regard to the border, I'm right there with the entire Democratic Party, which is that our country needs a strong immigration policy or comprehensive immigration policy, and we need strong borders that are enforced. We don't necessarily need a wall. The caveat that I'd throw on this is that, and because you haven't listened to the program before, you haven't heard me say this 1,000 times like most of our listeners have, but my position on that is that we don't have an illegal immigration problem in the United States. We have an illegal employer problem in the United States. We've had an open border with Mexico for 240 years, and we're by and large open up until basically the last 40 or 50 years. And you had people coming north during the picking season, and in fact, Eisenhower even tried the program called the Bracero program, where they gave these people a card, basically, permit to enter the country for up to 6 months to pick crops in California and Oregon and whatnot, and then they would go back south and go back to be with their families with a pile of cash. And you'd have about 500,000 people coming to the United States every year, and about 500,000 people leaving at the end of the picking season. That went on for 70 years. And then what happened? But beyond agriculture, there was no invasion of American industry, to use language that is kind of a variation on Trump's language. There was no invasion of American industry by people who were not legal citizens outside of agriculture, and there were specific exemptions in the law for agricultural workers. In fact, that would be like the Bracero program. But there was also a very strong law, and this was put into place in the 1880s about the ability, and reinforced in the 1930s, about the ability of the government to prosecute employers who hire people who are not legal citizens or don't have legal, don't have a green card, don't have a legal right to work in the United States. And up until 1986, the United States government routinely threw employers in jail who hired people who were not here legally. And that's why the construction industry was entirely unionized. building houses all over the country, entirely unionized. It was one of the best jobs you could get. One of my brothers was a union roofer and a union electrician. The meatpacking industry was entirely unionized, and they had, they did so well and they made so much money, these workers, that the union meatpacking workers in Wisconsin got together and built their own NFL team. It's called the Packers. It's the only NFL team in the country that's not owned by a billionaire. It's owned by the community, and it originally was owned by union members. But what happened was in 1986, when Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 5 million people, that wasn't the big thing that he did with his so-called immigration reform. The big thing he did was he officially stopped prosecuting employers. And so for the last 30 years, you've got meatpacking plants in Minnesota and construction sites in Las Vegas and other industries all over the United States who literally are placing Spanish language ads in tabloid newspapers that are being passed out for free on the Mexican side of our southern border. They're help wanted ads. If you can get to this city in Wisconsin, you've got a job. And those union jobs that used to pay the equivalent of maybe $30 an hour in today's money are now paying $12 an hour, or $8 an hour, or $7 an hour, $7.25 an hour. So we need to start putting employers in jail again. And Trump is not doing this. When he did that big, well-publicized bust of 7-Eleven, who went to jail? The workers. The guys who owned the franchises? Nope. 7-Eleven? Nope. No fines, no penalties. Maybe there was some fines, but basically nobody went to prison. And when we start putting rich white guys in jail again, you're going to see these formerly unionized industries come back. So I don't remember the other topics that you were raised, Dennis, but that's my take on immigration.
Well, I want to thank you because this definitely gives me something to study up on. Once again, thank you.
You're welcome. Dennis, thanks for the call. It's great talking with you, and I look forward to future conversations. Bob, listening on Sirius XM in Montana. Hey, Bob, you voted for Trump?
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
For taking my call. I'm a big Trump supporter. I just, more on the economic front. Us in Montana here, the unemployment rate is under 3%.
So you're liking the ninth year of the Obama expansion?
Oh yeah, well yeah. I mean, I just think that Obama did good at the end, but when Trump got in, everything accelerated on the business front twofold. We have the greatest economics that this country's ever seen, and I'm a numbers guy. I'm not a feeling. Okay, so question for you, Bob. If the economy crashes in the next 12 to 16 months or 18 months, are you still going to support Trump? It's not going to crash. Right, but let's just a hypothetical. I'll stipulate it's not going to crash. It's going to last forever, or at least until Trump leaves office. But if it does, would that cause you to question your support for him? It's going to be a 15-year boom here. Well, I hope so, because a lot of people get hurt when the economy crashes. But if it were to crash, would that cause you to question your support for Trump if you're kind of a single issue voter here on the economy? Well, obviously, yeah. Then I would have to look back at what caused the crash. Was it the tax? Was it the tax? Cut changing of tax laws, or was it is the deficit? $21 trillion in deficit. Yeah, he just added $1.5 trillion to the deficit for this year. Oh, yeah, I know, yeah. But Obama, what did we do with Obama? $9 trillion over the 8 years? We're still on that pace. I don't think it was that much, but yeah, absolutely right. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan really hurt us badly. Bob, thank you for the call. It's good talking to you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes. And, the program rolls on. Stick around. And welcome back. Louise in Portland, Bruce in Portland, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Bruce, what's up?
All right. I'm reminded of this frustration constantly. It's like, for example, you had a caller named Jesse who listed all the unprecedented climate catastrophes that we're experiencing. And we get up to that point of listing all these things, and we don't take that extra step and say, well, every time you turn your car on, you're creating greenhouse gases. Every time you get in an airplane, you're doing it. All the free trade in the world is by ships. I mean, we're really deep into fossil fuels.
Yeah.
My point would be, go renewables. It will pull the rug out from under Trump and the Koch brothers and all of those fossil fuel people.
I agree with you, Bruce. I'd like to recalibrate your message slightly, and you tell me what you think of this. My concern is that when you say, oh, it's you driving your car or you flying on an airplane, basically what we're doing is blaming the victims. We're also the victims of climate change. And it's not like I have a choice. If I want to, go visit my kids, I have to drive in my car. If I want to, go visit my brother, I have to get on an airplane. There's just no other way to do it. Oh, actually, I could drive, but the airplane is far more fuel efficient, as a way to get from here to Michigan, for example. So, what we need are policy changes. And I absolutely agree with you. It needs to be renewables. But that has to be driven from the government. Right now, we're giving a $300 billion a year subsidy to the oil industry, which has been going on for almost a century now. Not $300 billion, but it's probably in today's in the $1890, it's the equivalent. We've been giving this huge subsidy. I mean, actual cash out of your and my taxes is given to the oil industry, $300 billion a year. The mining industry, the coal mining industry, getting billions of dollars a year in subsidies. The natural gas industry, billions of dollars a year in subsidies. And this doesn't count, for the oil industry, this doesn't count the cost of protecting the shipping lanes from Saudi Arabia, which is another multiple billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And we will not and we're marginally subsidizing anything that's renewable. And basically what Trump has done is do away with all the subsidies that Obama had put into place. It seems to me like we should be rewarding the stuff that's going to keep us from being destroyed and stop rewarding the stuff that's destroying us.
I'm sorry if I came off like a blamer. I'm just trying to state how deep we are in the use of fossil
fuels. Your
fuels.
point is well made. I absolutely agree with it.
Like the March on Washington, people weren't doing us a favor by burning all kinds of fossil fuels to get there. Even though I support it, it's a real complicated and conflicting thing for me that people aren't. Even Naomi Klein, who wrote that beautiful book, she wrote an article in Harper's and also the Sierra Club magazine, and she didn't mention renewables. And somebody should be running down electric vehicles. We have an electric vehicle, and we get all of our electricity in Portland from renewable sources.
Yeah, I do too, and we plug our car in every night, and we love it. Bruce, thank you for the call. I got to run here. We're hitting a break, and we're going to check in with Talk Media News. But thank you very much for your call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Helping you win the water cooler wars, Thom Hartmann with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, Luke Vargas, out of New York. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Luke, I see that the world has surpassed a terawatt. Is that 1 trillion watts in renewable energy generation? Is this a big milestone?
Yeah, it's 1,000 gigawatts, and I apologize in advance if my audio isn't perfect. We haven't done video in a while, and you used to not be able to do the video over the Skype. So
yeah, no, it sounds good, actually.
Okay, good. Well, yeah, so this is a big milestone. 1 terawatt equals the amount of power generated in the United States altogether. So this is a huge milestone. It's also equal to the amount of coal power generation in China. And we are, we're hitting a milestone. This is something that was predicted by Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is a think tank focusing on renewable energies. They said we would hit this precisely when we did. what we've actually done is sort of beat expectations, because their calculations about 5 years ago about how uptake of renewable energy was going to occur did not think that photovoltaic cells, these solar cells, would be as cheap as they are. And in fact, prices have come down faster than anyone expected, which is a great thing. Of course, we now have President Trump putting tariffs on imported photovoltaic cells, which is going to probably slow down some possible uptick that could have occurred in adoption of solar energy in the United States. But even still, we're doing well. We're hitting these targets. One thing that's really cool here is that basically all economists I've spoken to said 5 to 10 years from now, solar and wind are going to be absolutely compatible, gigawatt per gigawatt. These are, already seeing in certain markets competitive pricing for these renewable technologies, that the prices should be basically even everywhere within 5 to 10 years. And it took us 40 years and $2.3 trillion dollars to get to this first terawatt of renewable energy. The next terawatt is going to cost half as much, and we're going to install it within the next 5 years. So this technology is really accelerating. One problem, as I mentioned, are these Trump tariffs on imported PV cells, and uncertainty, which I think everyone can understand about really if the Trump administration has an all-of-government approach that takes renewable energy seriously. But on the upside, one surprising positive comment coming from the Union of Concerned Scientists when I spoke to them this morning is that the Trump administration has okayed the development of a number of offshore wind farms on various sort of the continental shelf. Right. So just like they're putting oil leases out there, though, they have also been unable to deny the impact that can be achieved by those offshore wind farms. So some good news here in the U.S. and around the world.
There you go. And meanwhile, Yale has this group for this program called the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Yep. They've been measuring how Americans understand and think about this whole issue. What can we glean from that?
Yeah, I love the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. They're really good at sort of studying American opinions on a whole range of sort of subset issues to climate change as a headline topic. Mm-hmm. They've surveyed 22,000 people over the course of 10 years, now have a good decade of data here. 70% of Americans nationwide think global warming is happening. That's a great number. It obviously ought to be higher in my view, but we only go down as low as 59% in West Virginia, 60% in Wyoming and North Dakota, and the low 60s in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mississippi. As high as it gets is in Washington, D.C. 82% of respondents think global warming is real, 77% in New York, about the same in California, and a little lower in Massachusetts.
Do you suspect?
Go ahead.
Do you suspect that's going to change following this insane summer?
I know. Let me get to what I actually think is the problem here, cool. Which is that 36% of Americans say they discuss global warming at least occasionally. That's worryingly low. And only 22% of Americans, and here's where we come in, hear about global warming in the media at least once a week. I have to say I got a copy of the New York Times Sunday magazine last week, which dedicated its whole issue to how the decade we failed to stop global warming several decades ago. And then The Economist has their front cover over this weekend saying we're losing the war on climate change. For those of us, taking in certain types of media, I'm sure, we're in that 22%, right, who are hearing about global warming at least once a week. Pretty worrisome, though, that, it's perhaps an echo chamber for us is other people who are just being entirely left out of this. That's pretty scary when you look at almost 4/5 of Americans not hearing about climate change or global warming at all on a weekly basis. And the other thing that I think is concerning as I look through the numbers is this sort of invincibility complex that Americans seem to have about the risks posed by global warming, which is 70% of people in the U.S. believe that global warming is going to hurt plants and animals around the world. That's great, because it will, and it already is. 62%, though, believe it will hurt people in developing countries. Only 58% of people think global warming will hurt people in the United States, and only 41% think global warming will harm them personally. So the closer this issue gets to you, the more you think I'm insulated from this. It's not something I need to worry about. Maybe I can, people in the developing world are vulnerable because they're poor and they face diseases that I don't. But this severe insulation of the risk of climate change, believing it's not going to come and impact me, I think is probably discouraging action or people pushing from action on this issue. So I see
stuff.
It is worrisome as you look at that perceived risk getting less and less as it comes closer to the person answering the questions.
Yeah. And in our remaining 40 seconds here, I wanted to get into Saudi Arabia. This is a big deal in my mind. Canada has called out Saudi Arabia's human rights records. Saudi Arabia is trashing Canada for that. Is the United States going to defend Canada, or are we going to defend Saudi Arabia?
Well, by our silence on human rights, we will probably defend by proxy the Saudis, though I don't think we're going to wade into this one, given the fact that the Saudis have called off all business dealings with Canadians. They've revoked 18,000 scholarships for students to study abroad in Canada. The ambassadors have been recalled. I think the 10-second conclusion here is that we might see Mohammed bin Salman pursuing reform to try and increase business in the country, but he's not going to be more tolerant of any dissent against that country's human rights policy. So that's actually going to make his broader economic ambitions, I think, difficult in the years to come.
Yeah, and you look at what he's doing in Yemen, for example, it seems like he's just really committed to autocracy. I think a lot of people were hoping he'd be in favor of a little bit of democracy, but apparently not. Luke, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Jamal Abdi of the National Iranian American Council right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. Neil Howe, and this book was published, I believe, in the late 90s, just FYI. 1998. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory nor over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from LA to DC, from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. I'd add this was at the height of the Newt Gingrich and impeachment and all that kind of craziness. Not long ago, America, which is the predecessor, has really set up Donald Trump. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, are you a very important person? Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Yet even while we exalt our own personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from business and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy in the world. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. This is the consequence of Reaganism. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there solidly for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slimmed-to-none pensions, scoff at an illusory Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their own leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. We perceive our civic challenge as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies another and another ad infinitum. To fix crime, we have to fix the family, but before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit, but we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing our schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities, and that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum upon which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted. But that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our intuition. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called seculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the seculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, where a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. And the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current seculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidencies. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what's happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-'60s to the tax revolts of the early '80s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's mid-1980s Morning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the decade, 8 or 10 years from now. Amid the glitz of the early Reagan years, no one predicted that the nation was entering an era of national drift.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is our old friend Jamal Abdi with the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, NIAC.org is the website. And Jamal, welcome back to the program.
Hey, how are you, Tom?
Great to have you with us. Big news, I think, tell me if it is or not, the European Union, this is from The Hill. The European Union, the EU, is warning businesses, European businesses specifically, that cut ties with Iran over new U.S. sanctions, that those firms could face EU sanctions. This is a quote from Nathalie Tosi, an aide to the EU's foreign policy head, that she told BBC Radio 4 yesterday. If EU companies abide by U.S. secondary sanctions, they will in turn be sanctioned by the EU. We're doing this in order to signal diplomatically to the Iranians that Europeans are serious about the Iran nuclear agreement. And the EU said on Monday that it would forbid European entities from complying with the sanctions. What's going on here?
The EU is fighting back. They announced that they would take this step, these blocking sanctions. They've done these in the past. It really, it's a question now of how strictly will the EU actually enforce this? Will they actually have some bite to their bark and seriously, go after their own companies who comply with the sanctions? Mm-hmm. I think that's up in the air, and there is more that the EU would need to do in order to not just have the costs for companies doing business with Iran, but also creating some, banking channels, exploring ways that, oil exports could continue through some sort of trading or bartering mechanism. So this is really, I think this is a symbolic step. I think the EU has showed that it is very serious about protecting this deal. But the actual practical implications that remain to be seen. We've already seen European companies leaving.
Yeah, Daimler left. If it's mostly big German companies that are leaving, and Germany basically has the muscle to change EU policy, is that the source of your skepticism? Or a source?
That is a source. I think that I think that large German companies probably will test this proposition. Now I don't know that for sure, but it's a matter of, does the political will exist for the EU to actually carry out these measures?
So,
and really,
go ahead.
It's a game of chicken now between sort of Donald Trump and the EU.
So Standard Chartered Bank, which is a UK chartered bank, but they have U.S. branches, and U.S. They do business in the United States. In fact, they're one of their biggest branches is at 1095 Avenue of the Americas in New York. They are licensed to operate in Iran. And among international banks, only about 25% of them are actually licensed to operate in Iran. So should Standard Chartered Bank in New York City be closed? I mean, is there any discussion of this? And then I want to get into where all this is going. I mean, if we're leading ourselves toward war with Iran.
Well, on your first question, that is what I would expect. I would actually, this is the Trump administration posing to the rest of the world and these banks and companies. You either do business with Iran or you can do business with us. You can't do both. And so all the indications are that this administration is going to go after everybody, as strictly as they can. So for now, I think they're following up on those threats. We've seen them back down a little bit on the oil sanctions, but we'll see how much of this is bluster and how willing they are to actually go after these companies.
Yeah, I just find it breathtaking that the Trump administration thinks that we can say to Britain or China or Chile or even Zambia, if you do business with Iran, you can't do business with us. It blows my mind. Is this a standard in past sanctions? I mean, is this the normal way that sanctions are done?
The sanctions on Iran are really some of the broadest sanctions ever created. So these sanctions, these are sanctions that came into force under the Obama administration, largely driven by Congress. But as far as the Obama administration was concerned, their role was to make sure that the rest of the world was actually bought into these sanctions. Right. And so they actually held off Congress for a long time. Well, not a long time, but they held Congress off so they could actually go to the UN, get approval for this, get the rest of the world to actually buy in. So it was much different. I don't think we've ever seen something quite like this where it's the United States versus the rest of the world in terms of enforcing its sanctions.
That's bizarre. So if we continue with this, and particularly in November, if we start blocking oil exports out of Iran, I understand already, and please fact check me on this, that the value of the Iranian currency has dropped by at least 70%, which means that everybody in Iran, at least on an international basis, is 2/3 less wealthy or 3/4 less wealthy than they used to be, than they were just a year ago, which is pretty shocking. I mean, that's got to have a huge impact on Iran. And I saw a thing in the Financial Times this morning that there were protests in the streets in Iran, in Tehran, yesterday. Could this, if the pressure is great enough on the Iranian government, might it provoke them to, rather than saying, oh, yeah, we'll come on bended knee to you guys and do exactly what you want, to instead say, we're going to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, and through which a very large percentage of the internationally traded oil in the world passes, and not just to the United States, by the way. And if they do that, might that be the thing that would lead us to World War III?
It's hard to envision anything other than an escalatory cycle right now. Donald Trump's offers of he's willing to negotiate with Iran without preconditions, which were then walked back by Mike Pompeo, who offered a bunch of preconditions. I think that in Iran, they are looking at those things, and politically, it's a non-starter. But there are a lot of question marks about, who is running the policy in Washington. Is Trump serious? But this whole approach is it's something that the Iranian, government and in general, they're just allergic to. This idea that they're going to be sort of forced to the table at the barrel of a gun, and so. Yeah, this threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz, it's not even the action of doing it. Even the threat is a form of leverage that Iran has.
Has the Iranian government already issued that threat, or is that implicit?
They've suggested it. They maybe have not directly threatened that it's imminent, but. If Iranian oil is taken off the market, it's likely going to mean that Saudi Arabia and others have to fill that gap, and they go into their excess capacity. So if they are running, near their full capacity, and Iran actually takes some steps to, suggest that it's going to do some things in the Strait of Hormuz, that could really do some bad things in the oil market, cause some real jitters, really spike the prices, and this could all happen, ahead of the U.S. midterms. So I think Iran is looking at, what kind of leverage do they actually have, because Donald Trump is going full bore with every piece of leverage that he has.
So
it's a very dangerous process.
Yeah, putting this in a historical context, back in the late 60s, early 70s, when we had, as I recall, 2 Arab oil embargoes or boycott embargoes, produced significant inflation and some serious problems in the United States, but it didn't lead to war. To what extent was Iran involved in any of that, or was that principally the Sunni countries?
Gosh, you're asking me historical questions.
I'm sorry. That, if you're not sure, that's fine. I'm just curious. So what can? Go ahead.
I'm pretty sure Iran actually was helpful to the U.S.
Yeah.
During the embargo.
Yeah, I think that was before the Shah fell, so that would make sense.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and thank you for remembering that. I should have remembered it before I asked the question. So what can we do? What can Americans do to encourage our government not to take steps that could lead directly to, well, I'm saying this, that could lead directly to nuclear war? The scenario that I envision is, the Iranians close the Straits of Hormuz, the Saudis, the Americans, the Israelis, somebody attacks Iran. Iran reaches out to Russia and says, help us out here. Russia attacks the countries that attacked Iran, and boom, we're in World War III, a thermonuclear, possibly World War III. A, do you think that scenario is realistic? We've discussed this in the past. I'm curious your current thinking on this. And B, what can we do to prevent that?
Yeah, there are so many tripwires for an escalation towards war, and towards, exactly what you laid out, a war that brings in all of the parties who so far have been fighting proxy wars in the region, but never actually fighting directly against one another. So it's extremely dangerous. I think with sanctions, these are sort of, these are the diplomatic version of a drone strike where they almost are viewed as cost-free, that they can happen behind the scenes, and the American public is not really going to be aware of what we are doing. They inflict, damage on populations, but largely out of the public eye. Sanctions, we're going to see humanitarian consequences. We are going to see medicine being denied to Iranians. We're going to see the all kinds of aircraft that can't be repaired, and the cost of goods is going to go up. And so I think it's really important that we talk about these things, and that these are being done in our names as Americans.
Yeah.
These are collective punishment in our name.
It seems to me that if people are in the streets in Tehran or in Iran, that given the type of government Iran has right now, that's going to work to the detriment of reformers like Rouhani and to the benefit of hardline right-wingers who actually would not necessarily be all that worried about a war. They might see a war as a way of strengthening their power. And I'm concerned that Donald Trump might see the same thing. Jerome, we have or Jamal, excuse me, we have a half a minute here. Your thoughts? Yeah,
this is the comfort zone for the hardliners in Iran's government. They love being in this spot. I think that this may be the death knell of the experiment of engaging the United States, at least for now. And for Donald Trump, I don't think he knows what he's gotten into. I don't think he's actually wrapped his head around this. He thinks that this is North Korea Part 2, and he's going to get some summit out of this.
Right.
He is surrounded by some of the biggest warmongers, and so this is really dangerous.
Yeah, John Bolton in particular. Jamal Abdi, the Vice President for Policy at the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, NIAC.org is the website. You can tweet him at jabdi, A-B-D-I. Jamal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
It's always great talking with you. I always learn something, and I'm very concerned about this. Thank you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, it says here you want to disagree with me? About what?
Hello, Tom.
Hey, Corky.
Yeah, I don't understand why people are so ignorant about the economy and how it works. Yeah, we got a great economy. Like you say, it was left over from Barack Obama.
And beyond that, it's not all that great an economy. Wages...
like a car.
Yeah,
you got to go the speed limit. Otherwise, terrible things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And when you pump $1 trillion into an already good economy, what you're doing is stepping on the gas. And you're driving erratic. And what's going to happen is you're going to have a crash, and you're not going to have any money to fix your economy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, I noticed on Twitter some people saying to me, why didn't you correct that guy about the economy? And I was really more interested in whether if the economy crashed, he was going to, continue supporting Trump. And I only had, at that point in time, I think 45 seconds until we were going to hit the brakes. So I had to make a choice. But I agree with you, Corky, to some extent, although I would not characterize this as a good economy. And there's like these conflicting reporting, right? The Financial Times was reporting a couple of days ago that wages, earnings, the wages are up some 2 or 3%. Actually, I saw it on MSNBC on Stephanie Rule's program too, that wages are up 2 or 3%. But wages are not. That includes all the compensation that all the CEOs, senior executives, and white-collar workers are getting. If you just look at hourly wages, which is the majority of the economy in the United States, it's well over half of people work on an hourly basis rather than on a salary. If you look at hourly wages, they're actually down this year over last year. So I don't see where this is all that great an economy unless you happen to be in the stock market. Corky? Oh, Corky went away. Okay. Let's see here. Rich in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Rich, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind?
Hey, we had something really kind of new and different to our voting ballots today. They added a third party.
You have an election in Michigan today?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's not the primaries. It's the what do you call it before the primaries, where you decide who's going to run for governor on the Democratic Party.
That's a primary. It's not the general election, right? Okay.
Okay.
So.
Well, anyways, they added. First off, they made it so you can only vote single party.
Right.
And then they added the gosh darn it, I forget what they're called now. Libertarian.
Well, that's interesting. If they had added the Greens, I would say they're trying to hurt the Democrats. If they've added the Libertarians, that's going to take votes away from the Republicans.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, you know. I mean, it's like, well, what do we got two Republican parties here for?
Yeah.
And, yeah, I find the whole thing kind of confusing.
Or two corporatist parties. Well, that's fascinating.
And they were trying to make it sound like it was going to take 45 minutes or more to vote, and I think I got in and out in less than 5 minutes.
Wow.
There wasn't very many people. Of course, I went on a time that I figured there wouldn't be very many people, but yeah, it just seemed.
Isn't the Democratic candidate for governor who's a progressive? His name is Al Said. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, something Bernie backed.
Yeah. So
I can't remember his first name now.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see if he wins after, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was there, Bernie was there. The guy has really good progressive cred. Thank you, Rich. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, THOM, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann.
Back. Mike in Wheaton, Maryland. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
You know, have you ever heard of Negro Wall Street?
No.
Well, you can look it up. It's now been changed to Black Wall Street.
Okay.
But it was Tulsa, Oklahoma had a.
Oh yes, I have. And then you're talking about back in the day when the Klan rioted and killed all those people and all that stuff.
Well, it wasn't really the Klan. It was the white community that went that became a mob, and that was when bombs were, Molotov cocktails were dropped from airplanes, and based on a white woman lying again.
Yeah, like with Emmett Till.
Man.
Yeah.
Right. And this was during the most segregated period because the destruction of Black Wall Street or Negro Wall Street. I wish you'd do some research on it because, when people come here from faraway land, thousands of miles, when they come here, they create little enclaves. And they find things that are, people that have, from the same place that have something in common. Okay.
Typically, at least for the first generation, although those enclaves tend not to last more than 2 generations. But yeah, I get your point.
Okay. Now, Black Wall Street having not failed by black people building businesses, building black banks, churches, institutions, all kinds of stuff in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
It was destroyed. So the principles that were practiced in Negro Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma, between the turn of the century, 1900, and its destruction in 1921, are timeless principles. Okay,
mm-hmm.
that we as black folk, we need to look at because we're not taught our history. So a lot of us are ignorant of that place.
Yeah, nobody is taught that history, Mike.
Exactly.
And it's a major problem.
And I'm kind of sick of being, Malcolm X spoke of suffering peacefully. And that's what we're constantly doing, is suffering peacefully.
Yeah.
And you got Asian Americans rotating the dollar in America 21 days before it leaves their community.
Yeah. No, I get everything you're saying, Mike, and you're right. We do need to focus more on this. Thank you very much for the call and for the wake-up. I appreciate it. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truths the multinational corporations and the neoliberals would rather you didn't know all about. Right back with you. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. But you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just wanted to catch you up real quickly on two things, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. The first is Ohio 12. This is where Danny O'Connor, the Democrat, is running, and this is fascinating. This is an email that I saw posted over at Democratic Underground earlier. Ohio 12 just heard back from Text the Vote. They had so many volunteers signing up to help that they went through their entire database by 10 a.m. this morning and have sent over 140,000 texts on behalf of Danny O'Connor. This is a get out the vote effort. In a seat, the Republicans have won by over 35 points in each of the last two elections. This has to be a very good sign. You think? I mean, whether Danny O'Connor wins or not, if it's a squeaker, the Republicans won this by 35 points in the last elections. This should be an early indicator of what's happening in, I think, across the country, frankly. I mean, Ohio is kind of a bellwether state. The other is, in the first hour of the program, I was talking about how the it's the old neoliberal privatization playbook. How to take things like Social Security, the post office, your electric supply, the public schools, how to take things that used to be public functions, or in the case of like hospitals. I grew up in Michigan. In Michigan, there was a law in the books up until after I left in '78. I don't know when they repealed it, but that all hospitals had to be nonprofits. And now, of course, you got for-profit hospitals ripping people off. So how do they get from nonprofit to for-profit? How do they get from publicly owned, government-owned, to privately owned, corporate-owned. It's a four-step process. They defund or sabotage the program, cutting money out of the post office, cutting money to the administration of Social Security and Medicare, so that cutting the money to the Veterans Administration, so that the wait times increase and the service degrades. Then they scream, "Oh my God, there's a crisis," number two. And then number three, they say, to solve this crisis, we need to privatize this system, which is in part what happened a couple of years ago with the Veterans Administration. And then number four, ka-ching, the for-profit corporations start making money. This is from a piece by Lambert Strether over at nakedcapitalism.com. But this amazing thread developed on Twitter, he writes. An opponent of, quote, socialized medicine deployed the, quote, wait times talking point and then asked, tell me again how good Canadian healthcare is? And he was claiming, I hate, my healthcare here in Canada because I have to wait a long time if I want a hip replacement. Here are the tweets that they got back. This was just amazing thread. Eve Rickert tweets, I immigrated, this was the first one, right? This was She tweeted back, she said, I immigrated from the U.S. to Canada in 2006, had top-of-the-line American insurance before moving, have had surgery and hospital stays in both countries. Canadian healthcare is just as high a quality, wait time similar, stress way lower. Why the stress lower? Because you don't have to worry about going bankrupt if you get sick. Cognitive Insistence adds to the thread. Meanwhile, I was hospitalized and then had complications. I've subsequently had to file for bankruptcy. I have terrible credit now, which impacts every aspect of my life. Yay, America. Cognitive being an American. Then the Canadians weighed in. Jonah B. at Wandering Shop. Canadian healthcare is amazing. I went to the hospital critically ill and skipped any waits because it's triage-based. In other words, if you have an emergency or you have something that's really serious, you get seen immediately. The next 5 months included 2 readmissions for 15 weeks of total critical care and surgeries. My parents got a deep discount on parking by paying by the month. My entire hospitalization cost $22, and that was for the parking. Then she says, adds, oh, well, I guess there was a couple bucks a day that to have my own cable TV as well, because I was bedbound with IVs in both arms, so I didn't want to go to the lounge or hold a book. Still amazing system. In the U.S., I'd be dead. Paula Simons weighs in. My husband needed brain surgery here in Canada. World-class neurosurgeons removed a wedge of his skull, used lasers to remove scar tissue on his temporal lobe, then put his skull back together. My biggest expenses were parking and snacks for stress eating. Terry K. writes, my father spent a week in a hospital, ambulance to the airport, air ambulance across the island, ambulance to second hospitals, 3 days there. Only cost was mom driving across the island to be with him and aforementioned parking and snacks. Zoe York replies, yes, my first son was born 7 weeks early, and granola bars and a month-long parking pass were my only expenses. You want to know how good Canadian health care is? Take a seat, son. I got all day. Voyage Vixen weighs in. I love our Canadian healthcare system. Broke 2 bones in my leg, and the same day, an excellent surgeon fixed it. No wait, no cost. In USA, 45,000 people die a year from no healthcare coverage, and many others lose everything financially. And I would add, by the way, more than half of all bankruptcies in the United States are because somebody got sick. The number of bankruptcies in Canada because somebody got sick, 0. 0. Corey replies, some people wait for some procedures because of triage. A life-threatening emergency will be cared for. I had my appendix out a few years ago, including ER, ultrasound, ambulance transport between hospitals, CT scan with contrast, IV fluids, meds, surgery, overnight stay, cost 0 in Canada. John Cullen says, another appendectomy here in the hospital at 1, saw a doctor at 3 p.m., right? At 1 p.m., saw the doctor at 3, ultrasound at 5, CAT scan at 6, on the surgery table at 8 p.m. Overnight stay, meds, and get this, the doctor found I also had a herniated belly button and fixed it for free. I got a 2-for-1 surgery, cost 0. That's the Canadian healthcare system. But the neoliberals, nonetheless, are going, oh my God, the wait times, oh my God. Chuck in Mosher, Louisiana. Hey, Chuck, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hey, hear me?
Hi, I hear you just fine. What's on your mind today?
Hey, good to talk to you. I listened to you forever. The guy that called earlier talking about the stories he hears about Hillary Clinton's mentor being a racist. Do you know that is Robert Byrd they're talking about?
So yeah, in fact, somebody tweeted the link to Fox News about that. I didn't know that Robert Byrd was Hillary Clinton's mentor, number one. And number two, yeah, Robert Byrd, when he was representing West Virginia back in the day, pre-1965, was a member of the Klan, actually. He renounced that and apologized for it repeatedly. And, I'd say the last 20 years of his life were pretty exemplary, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Anytime I say anything about, pointing out the racist tendencies of Trump, they always get back from all the right-wingers, but Hillary Clinton's mentor was a member of the Klan. But they don't mention the fact that, in his later years, he recanted his racist past. Plus, he was praised by the NAACP when he died as an exemplary, human being, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these myths that Fox News creates just live on, and the sad fact that the Fox watchers, the Fox viewers, particularly chronic Fox viewers, don't get is that Fox News was created by Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire. Roger Ailes used to work in the Nixon White House. When Roger Ailes worked in the Nixon White House, he proposed something called GOP TV. There's a chapter about this in my book, The Crash of 2016, and it caused me to get disinvited from Fox News for 2 years. This chapter on the book, and Roger Ailes.
That's not a surprise.
Yeah, Roger Ailes proposed GOP TV. Let's create our own television network, and the Nixon administration couldn't get funding for it. And so finally, Roger found a billionaire who wanted to promote the interests of billionaires and get average working people to be voting in a way that would help billionaires. And that was, of course, Rupert Murdoch. And he had done the same thing in the UK with newspapers. And so he created Fox News. He lost $100 million a year for 5 years, almost $500 million before he made the first penny. And people say, oh, Air America was a big failure. They went bankrupt with $17 million in debt. It was crazy. And
he's the reason we have so many ignorant people in the country these days.
Yeah, but the whole point of Fox News is, a network owned by a billionaire, put together by Roger Ailes, a multi-millionaire with hosts like Sean Hannity, who's a multi-millionaire, promoting the interests of the very rich and causing people to think that they should vote in a way that would help the very rich. Because somehow that's going to, stop abortion or something. I mean, they'll find some little hot button issue or they'll just lie, like about Robert Byrd. That's pretty breathtaking.
Yep.
Chuck, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM, and thanks for correcting the record there. I appreciate it. Marilyn in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. I just found you a few days ago because I fell and hurt my hip and was looking for something better to watch on television. And you brought up something on TV just a minute ago that I haven't heard too many people talk about, which really gets my goat, and that is the privatization or the corporatization of our government, which actually takes away the idea of government. I wanted to ask you what you think about Ronald Reagan when he first said, why let the government do what the corporations can do cheaper and more efficient, and how that is not removing the original intent of the democracy of us being run by the people for the people.
Yeah. Reagan might have believed that, and a lot of people did believe that in the 1980s when Reagan became president, that corporations do things more efficiently and less expensively than government. And I suppose if you're looking at the Soviet government, where they were making cars and computers and TV sets, it might have actually even been true, although I've never seen a study that demonstrated that. Government doesn't have the overhead of profit. On the other hand, business has, in order to maximize profit, the incentive to streamline their operations. So there's a balance between the two. But the fact of the matter is that Reagan wanted to privatize basically everything. And there are a lot of things that government actually does better than private industry that are those are the things that have to do with the commons. They have to do with all of us. So I was horrified when Reagan started promoting that. But it was not new to his administration. I mean, Nixon was saying the same thing. That's just an old Republican meme about let's just turn everything over to the billionaire class. Let's turn everything over to the corporations. We don't need we the people doing anything for we the people when the billionaires will take care of us. And if they don't take care of us, you can put a little can in a 7-Eleven and say, I need an appendectomy. Please drop $1 in the can. I mean, that's the Republican way, right? And yeah. Marilyn, thank you for the call. Very well said. I appreciate it. And you brought up a great topic. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 16 minutes before the hour, or 14 minutes before the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
As we head into our last 15 minutes of the show here, back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. David watching us on Free Speech TV in Torrance, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. I like your program, and I'm one of your supporters. One of this, for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing that Democratic candidates, they're seeing how important the messaging is, and they're seeing that the messaging is actually getting some effect even in the Republican areas.
Yeah, I think Bernie was a big wake-up. You know, when Bernie's some of his huge victories, Michigan and West Virginia, totally unexpected.
Yeah. Yes. One of the things that since a lot of progressive people are watching or listening to your program, I think it's not a bad idea for the people to propose what their proper messaging would be for the upcoming election. Like you had the same kind of things. You ask people which candidates they like for the election. Mm-hmm. How about asking people what messaging they like for the upcoming election? And
yeah, those surveys have been done, David. And what people have found, or what Democrats have found anyway, the Democratic pollsters, is that the number one issue right now in the United States is health care. And I think most Americans would love to have something like the Canadian system, number one. The second issue seems to be the economy and economic security. And that ties into good jobs, raising the minimum wage, strengthening labor unions, flipping our Supreme Court decisions upside down. And then there's a whole bunch of issues that kind of come into the third tier there.
Yeah, I think one of the good message that I propose is that economic justice for working Americans. I mean,
yes.
that would be a good message for.
Yeah, that's that second tier message that I was mentioning, and I think that in particular the progressive candidates are picking this stuff up and running with it, and the rest of the Democratic Party is slowly kind of waking up to the reality of this. But I expect that by November you're going to, and certainly by the 2020 election, you're going to see so-called mainstream Democrats who typically take a lot of corporate money, who've even been taking money from health insurance companies and big hospital groups, starting to say it's time for Medicare for all. It really is. And because they're more interested in getting reelected than they are in getting an extra $1 million in their campaign coffers. Usually there's a relationship between the two, but when you've got a really hot issue like health care for all, Medicare for all, something that Bernie really made real for Americans in a very real way, and then Hillary Clinton did as well. I think that that's something that you can't just kind of blow off. I'm not sure where the third, fourth, and fifth messages should be. David, do you have thoughts on where they should be? What they should be? Excuse me.
I don't know. I just this is
okay. I would say something broadly. I think
at you and see what you think about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate the call. I would say broadly something like stop neoliberalization, but that's not a bumper sticker, right? But stop privatizing things and build the commons. Rebuild America's infrastructure, make America great again. Can't believe I said that. But that's what we need to do. I mean, not in the Trump sense, but actually, Trump campaigned. We're going to spend more money on infrastructure. It hasn't happened, but he campaigned on it. We'll be back. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-3700. 9889. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Social Security and Medicare, it really worries me. And I've called several times in the past about this. I've been on Social Security and Medicare for the last 3 years. Thank God for Medicare. I lost my house. I had 2 cancer surgeries. People don't know what they're going to lose until they lose it. They're not going to find out.
Right.
What worries me about this whole thing is even if we take back the house, they had made such a mess of this of our budget that could it be so where the Democrats might be forced to cut Social Security and Medicare to accommodate, just to keep it going? Would that ever happen?
Well, that's the plan. And in fact, they even got President Obama to say that he would consider a chain CPI, which is a cut to Social Security. It backfired on him politically, and he backed away from it really quick. But the Republicans have been pushing him to do that, and some of the more quote moderate end quote Democrats, who were taking money from the banks, who would make a fortune if Social Security was privatized. But I'm frankly more sanguine about the possibility that we're going to see Social Security and Medicare strengthened rather than cut. I think that the tide has turned. And
I hope so.
Yeah,
I'm hoping you're right. Another thing that bothers me, the Social Security and Medicare, every time I hear people talking that they're going to get, even politicians, you don't see any retaliation from any of the senior citizens. Where are they screaming? They should be screaming about this. They should be on the phone. I hardly hear any of them talking about it. Are they all millionaires?
No, the problem is that the AARP, which just kind of gives milquetoast lip service to these kind of topics rather than being an activist organization, gets the vast majority of their money from United Healthcare. And I mean, the vast majority. They're the AARP headquarters in D.C. I've been there, or I've walked by anyway. Is mansion-esque. It's money pouring all over the place. And United Healthcare is making so much money on Medicare. I mean, the Republicans drilled holes in Medicare so it only covers 80% of your expenses. And so you have to buy insurance, supplemental insurance. And AARP sells the supplemental insurance from United Healthcare. United Healthcare has made so much money on this that their CEO, Stephen J. Hemsley, has made over $1 billion. He's taken over $1 billion out of that company. His predecessor, they called him Dollar Bill McGuire, took $1.5 billion out of United Healthcare. Just one guy. And there's over 100 executives making over $1 million a year at United Healthcare. So all these sweet ads and stuff, but AARP knows which side their bread is buttered on, and they're not taking on the neoliberals. They're not taking on the big corporations, and that's the unfortunate part about it, Donald. Donald, thanks for the call. We need activist organizations for boomer seniors, and unfortunately, there's not a good one out there, at least that I know of. Lindsay in Florence, Kentucky. Hey, Lindsay, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment about wait times as far as Canadian healthcare versus here goes. Myself and my son both have some chronic conditions that require us to see specialists, and we live outside of the Cincinnati, Ohio area. So we have quite a few larger hospital systems. We have a large research university hospital here, and even with the plethora of providers that we have available to us, my son's neurologist wait time every year as an established patient, we schedule out 7 months in advance.
Yeah.
So when I hear these people say, oh, Canadian wait times, for a new patient, his pediatric neurologist schedules 11 months in advance.
Yeah. And
that's if you have a legitimate reason to go to her. If you are still in the diagnosis phase and you don't have a diagnosis yet, you can't get on her calendar.
Yeah,
So heaven forbid you have something legitimate wrong with you, you're still getting passed specialist to specialist through the system before you can actually see the person that will fix it for you. Close to a year as a new patient. So when I hear these wait time comments, I'm like, you know what? If it's less than 7 months, I'm calling it a win.
Yeah, there you go. We saw that Louise and I experienced the same thing both when we moved to D.C. and then when we moved back to Portland. In both cases, we contacted local doctors and, you know, we'd like to be a new patient for you. And in D.C., the wait time was well over a year just for the first meeting with the doctor. And here in Portland, it was at least 5 or 6 months, as I recall. And, you know, what happens is the people who can afford to go to concierge docs, where you pay $500 a year or $1,000 or a couple thousand, in D.C. it was $3,000 a year for a couple, they can afford to do it and they get in right away, and everybody else is, you know, SOL. You got to go to the emergency room if you need your Synthroid refilled or something like that. Lindsay, thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it, and you nailed it. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be fascinating. I'm guessing one of our major topics of conversation tomorrow will be what happened in the election in Ohio today. I'm keeping an eye on that tonight. It's going to be an amazing day. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It takes all of us, and that includes you. There's a lot of great organizations out there you can participate with. There are a lot of ways you can make change happen. Get inside the political parties, Democratic or Republican. You know, get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes travels the world looking for the finest wines and then bottles them in this lot way so that you can save an enormous amount of money. Last night, Louise and I had the 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. It was extraordinary. You can learn more at chwine.com/Tom. The new X chair, it's the X3, is just such a big upgrade from even the old X chair, which I think was one of the very best chairs, if not the best chair, office chair on the market. Check it out at xchairtom, T-H-O-M, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. Oh, hi. I was just meditating, listening to the sounds of the ocean from this app, from my brainwaves that are being detected by the Muse headband. To find out more about it, check out choosemuse.com, code TOM.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retarees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.